Something is shifting today, and deep down, you already feel it. Tuesday, May 26, is not carrying ordinary energy, and this is not the kind of astrological movement that passes quietly through the background of your life. For weeks, pressure has been accumulating beneath the surface of the collective, building silently like tectonic plates grinding against one another in the dark. And now the atmosphere has become too charged to ignore. At this very moment, Mars and Pluto are locked into a confrontation so intense that it feels less like a transit and more like a cosmic reckoning. Mars, the planet associated with drive, survival instinct, anger, action, and raw human willpower, is pressing against Pluto, the force of destruction, transformation, death, rebirth, and irreversible evolution. Neither energy is willing to bend. Neither energy is interested in compromise. And when midnight arrives today, the pressure between them reaches its peak. This is the moment when something hidden inside people begins to crack open. This is the kind of alignment that corners you psychologically and emotionally until avoidance is no longer possible. The universe is removing distractions, closing exits, and confronting you with the one decision, the one truth, or the one internal conflict you have delayed for far too long. If you have recently felt irritation boiling beneath your calm exterior, if you have noticed moments where anger flashes through your body for no clear reason, or if you feel emotionally trapped and unable to explain why everything suddenly feels so intense, there is a reason for that. What is surfacing now is not random frustration. It is accumulated resistance, finally reaching critical mass. Something within you knows your current reality can no longer continue the way it has been, and your nervous system is reacting before your conscious mind fully understands it. But before you can understand why this emotional pressure is becoming impossible to contain, you need to recognize what today truly represents. This day is not only about conflict, it is about endings. 3 major chapters are closing simultaneously, whether you are emotionally prepared for it or not. A former version of yourself is collapsing under the weight of this transit. The version that stayed quiet to keep the peace, the version that settled for comfort over truth, the version that convinced itself survival was the same thing as fulfillment, that identity cannot survive the energy unfolding now, and what begins emerging in its place may completely alter the direction of your future. To understand why this energy feels so suffocating, you have to picture what is happening in the sky. Mars entered Taurus on May 18th, and the second it moved into Taurus territory, momentum began slowing down. Mars naturally wants speed, movement, victory, conquest, and immediate action. Mars is impulsive fire. It is a warrior charging forward without hesitation. Taurus, however, operates through heaviness, stability, caution, preservation, and resistance to change. Taurus does not rush. Taurus grips tightly. Taurus holds its ground. So imagine someone built for battle suddenly trying to run through thick, wet earth that pulls against every movement. That is Mars in Taurus. Every action feels delayed. Every attempt to move forward feels exhausting. The desire to break free intensifies, but the environment itself keeps slowing everything down. This creates enormous frustration because instinct says move, attack, escape, while reality says wait, endure, survive. Meanwhile, Pluto in Aquarius represents an entirely different force. Pluto is not concerned with comfort or emotional attachment. It does not care how long you spent building a structure if that structure is no longer aligned with evolution. Pluto destroys what has become stagnant. In Aquarius, Pluto operates through collective awakening, rebellion against outdated systems, exposure of manipulation, and radical transformation of societal patterns. Aquarius wants revolution. Pluto wants total transformation. Together, they create pressure that dismantles illusions at the deepest level. So when Mars in Taurus forms an exact 90-degree square to Pluto today, tension becomes unavoidable. Something must give way. But the shocking realization many people are about to face is that the thing breaking apart is not the external world first. It is the false identity they have been desperately trying to maintain. This square creates what astrologers often describe as a crisis of action. You feel an urgent need to move forward, but every pathway seems blocked. You want to defend yourself, but the enemy feels invisible. You try to preserve stability, yet the foundations underneath your life no longer feel secure. The harder you force outcomes, the more resistance you encounter. The more tightly you cling, the more emotionally trapped you become. And this is where many people misunderstand the purpose of the transit. The pressure is not punishment. The pressure is exposure. It is revealing where your life has become unsustainable long before your mind was willing to admit it. Yet hidden inside this intensity is another astrological movement that changes the entire story. Only 12 hours after the Mars-Pluto square reaches exact perfection, the Sun in Gemini forms a powerful trine to Pluto. This changes the energy dramatically. While Mars in Taurus becomes stuck fighting immovable obstacles through force, the Sun in Gemini approaches the same reality through intelligence, adaptability, communication, and perception. Gemini energy does not slam endlessly into walls. It studies them. It navigates around them. It finds hidden openings others miss. It uses awareness instead of brute strength. This is the hidden doorway most people will completely overlook today. The real victory is not found through aggression. It is found through mental flexibility. The universe is teaching you that the battle consuming your energy cannot be solved through control alone. There are situations in your life that cannot be conquered by forcing outcomes harder. They require a different level of consciousness entirely. They require you to outgrow the mindset that created the trap in the first place. And if you have recently felt mentally sharper, more observant, more aware of hidden patterns, more capable of reading between the lines of conversations and situations, that is not your imagination. Your perception is changing because your consciousness is preparing for this moment. You are beginning to see what was invisible before. But before you can step into what is opening, something else must end first. One of the biggest illusions collapsing today is the belief that material security alone can save you. Many people have been gripping tightly to structures that no longer nourish them emotionally because those structures provide familiarity. Maybe it is a career that slowly drains your spirit while providing financial safety. Maybe it is a relationship where emotional connection disappeared long ago, but comfort and routine made leaving feel impossible. Maybe it is an identity built entirely around appearing successful, while privately feeling disconnected, exhausted, and spiritually numb. And this is the deeper emotional truth behind today's transit. The fear of losing stability has kept many people trapped inside lives that no longer reflect who they truly are. But Mars square Pluto does not allow emotional dishonesty to survive forever. It exposes the emotional cost of staying where your soul has already outgrown. And as this pressure continues building throughout today, you may begin realizing that what once felt secure now feels more like confinement. The walls you built for protection may suddenly feel like a cage. The routines you depended on may begin feeling emotionally suffocating. And that realization is not here to destroy you. It is here to prepare you for the next chapter that is already trying to emerge beneath the surface. There is a painful realization unfolding underneath today's astrology that many people are trying desperately not to face. And that realization revolves around what you have mistaken for safety. Mars, moving through Taurus, has been intensifying the instinct to protect, preserve, accumulate, and control. This energy convinces people that survival comes from building thicker walls around themselves, collecting more resources, saving more money, securing more comfort, and tightening their grip on anything that creates the illusion of stability. Mars in Taurus wants guarantees. It wants permanence. It wants to believe that if enough protection is gathered around the self, then chaos can never penetrate the fortress. But the collision happening today with Pluto in Aquarius is designed to dismantle that entire psychological structure. Pluto does not care how long you spent constructing your emotional defenses if those defenses were rooted in fear instead of truth. And today's square is exposing something many people have avoided acknowledging for years. The foundation you trusted may not actually be supporting you at all. It may only be keeping you trapped. This transit is not necessarily about losing possessions, careers, relationships, or external forms of stability. It is about releasing the desperate attachment to things you believed would save you emotionally. Because deep down, many people already know the truth. The carefully managed life they built does not feel alive anymore. The security they fought so hard to maintain has slowly become emotional confinement. Pluto in Aquarius is forcing an awakening around this reality. Real security cannot come solely from material accumulation. It cannot come from a title attached to your name, from the number inside a bank account, from a polished reputation, or from the image you present to the world. Those things can disappear. Those things can change overnight. The deeper form of stability this transit is trying to awaken inside you comes from adaptability, self-trust, resilience, and the knowledge that even if life collapses around you, you possess the intelligence, awareness, and internal strength necessary to rebuild yourself again. That is the lesson emerging now. And this realization becomes emotionally overwhelming because many people are beginning to recognize that the very thing they have been clinging to for safety may actually be suffocating their evolution. The career that provides stability may be draining every ounce of inspiration from your spirit. The fear-based attachment to money may be keeping you locked inside a life too small for your future self. The routines that once comforted you may now feel emotionally deadening. The pressure building today is the universe forcing your hands open. It is demanding surrender. Not because you are being punished, but because your hands cannot receive something new while they are still desperately clutching what no longer aligns with your growth. And once you finally release the grip, once you stop trying to preserve an identity built from fear, you create space for a more authentic life to begin emerging. What comes next will not be built upon anxiety or survival instinct. It will be built upon truth. And that transition is terrifying because truth often requires you to walk away from versions of safety that no longer support who you are becoming. But the material illusion is not the only thing collapsing under today's transit. Something even deeper is being exposed. And this is where the emotional intensity many people are feeling begins to make sense. Pluto in Aquarius governs collective influence, social conditioning, group consciousness, and the invisible psychological systems that shape how people think and behave. Aquarius energy rules networks, communities, algorithms, social trends, public opinion, and the subtle pressure to conform in order to belong. As Pluto has continued moving retrograde through Aquarius over recent months, it has been forcing people to examine where they have unconsciously surrendered their individuality to the expectations of the collective. This is why so many people feel emotionally restless right now without fully understanding why. Beneath the surface, an internal rebellion has been growing. Somewhere inside yourself, you are beginning to recognize the places where you abandoned your own truth in order to avoid rejection. You are remembering every moment you stayed silent, even though your soul disagreed. Every moment you smiled politely while betraying your real emotions. Every situation where you performed a version of yourself that felt acceptable to others while hiding who you actually were underneath. Many people have spent years playing roles they never consciously chose. They became the reliable one, the agreeable one, the peaceful one, the successful one, the emotionally controlled one, because those identities earned approval, validation, or belonging. But over time, constantly performing for acceptance creates profound emotional exhaustion. The rage surfacing now is not random anger. It is accumulated truth, demanding liberation. It is the authentic self pushing violently against years of suppression. It is the part of you that knows you were never meant to spend your life shrinking yourself in order to remain comfortable for everyone else. Today's Mars-Pluto collision is exposing the emotional cost of self-abandonment. It is revealing how much life force has been wasted trying to fit into systems, communities, and expectations that were never designed for the real version of you. And this awakening can feel lonely at first, because authenticity disrupts old dynamics. The moment you stop pretending, some people will resist it. Some people may become uncomfortable when you begin speaking honestly. Others may distance themselves entirely because the version of you they depended on was the performance, not the truth underneath it. But this transit is teaching something essential. Anyone who requires your silence, your suppression, or your self-betrayal in order to remain connected to you was never aligned with your next chapter to begin with. Pluto in Aquarius is severing the psychological cords that tied your identity to external approval. And once those cords begin breaking, you may suddenly realize how much energy has been drained by trying to belong in environments where your authentic self could never fully breathe. Yet perhaps the most emotionally explosive part of this entire transit involves something even more personal, and that is your relationship with anger itself. Mars in Taurus rarely expresses rage directly. Instead of confronting problems immediately, this energy tends to internalize frustration. It tolerates discomfort for too long. It suppresses resentment in order to maintain peace and stability. It convinces itself that silence is maturity and endurance is strength. But what actually happens is that unspoken anger accumulates slowly over time, like poison, settling deeper and deeper into the body. Many people under this transit have been swallowing their boundaries for years. They avoided difficult conversations because confrontation threatened security. They accepted emotional crumbs because asking for more felt dangerous. They minimized their own needs because prioritizing themselves felt selfish or disruptive. They learned to survive by staying quiet. But today, the pressure becomes impossible to contain. The square between Mars and Pluto intensifies every buried emotion that has remained trapped beneath the surface. It is like emotional heat building inside a sealed container with nowhere left to escape. This does not necessarily mean people will completely lose control outwardly. But it does mean the old strategy of suppressing anger, denying resentment, and sacrificing personal truth to maintain harmony is reaching its breaking point. The martyr identity can no longer survive under this level of pressure. The emotional patterns that once helped you feel safe are now becoming destructive to your spirit. And as this realization intensifies, you may begin recognizing that avoiding conflict did not actually preserve peace. It only preserved silence. Real peace was never meant to require the abandonment of your own voice. And that realization is preparing you for the next phase of this transit, where the energy shifts from suppression into transformation. For a long time, you've been trying to contain something that was never meant to stay buried forever. The emotional pressure you pushed aside, the resentment you convinced yourself to tolerate, the conversations you delayed because the timing never felt right, all of it has continued accumulating beneath the surface, like heat trapped inside a sealed chamber. And today, under the intensity of this Mars-Pluto collision, that chamber begins to crack open. The emotional tension you have been hiding from others, and perhaps even hiding from yourself, is no longer willing to remain silent. Situations that have been unresolved for years are beginning to demand acknowledgement. The truths you kept swallowing in order to preserve harmony are forcing their way upward. The anger you tried to spiritualize away, minimize, rationalize, or dismiss in the name of maturity is no longer content to sit quietly inside your body, poisoning your spirit from within. What many people are about to experience today is not random emotional chaos. It is accumulated truth, finally refusing suppression. The arguments that were postponed are moving closer to eruption. The emotional boundaries that were ignored are demanding recognition. The words you rehearse silently in your mind but never spoke aloud are pressing against your throat with unbearable intensity. And the difficult part of this awakening is recognizing that the eruption itself is necessary. Because despite how uncomfortable this energy feels, it is not appearing to destroy you. It is appearing to release you. Every moment you betrayed your own feelings in order to appear calm has carried a cost. Every time you smiled and said everything was fine when it absolutely was not, a piece of emotional honesty was sacrificed. Every swallowed boundary, every silent resentment, every act of self-abandonment created emotional residue that remained trapped inside your nervous system. And eventually, suppressed emotion transforms into exhaustion, bitterness, numbness, or internal rage. That is why today feels so intense. The emotional poison can no longer remain contained. It needs movement. It needs expression. It needs liberation. This transit marks the ending of silent suffering. It marks the collapse of passive aggression as a survival strategy. The carefully controlled version of yourself that learned to suppress truth in order to maintain stability is beginning to dissolve. And underneath that conditioned identity, your authentic voice is emerging with force. Not the polite version designed to keep others comfortable. Not the accommodating version that apologizes for having needs. Not the emotionally edited version that softens every truth to avoid conflict. The real voice. The one that knows exactly what has hurt you. The one that knows where you have compromised yourself. The one that is finally exhausted from pretending not to care. And when that voice begins rising to the surface, life can temporarily feel chaotic. Relationships may shift. Dynamics may become uncomfortable. Old structures may begin cracking apart. But what appears externally as disorder is actually the beginning of emotional liberation. Because for the first time in a long time, you are no longer abandoning yourself to preserve the comfort of everyone around you. You are reclaiming your own inner authority. And this is where the energy of the day begins changing completely. Because while multiple chapters are ending under the Mars-Pluto square, another powerful doorway is simultaneously opening through the Sun in Gemini, forming its harmonious trine to Pluto later this afternoon. This is the moment where the transformation begins making sense. Suddenly, the emotional fog starts lifting. The confusion begins organizing itself into clarity. What previously felt emotionally overwhelming starts revealing hidden purpose. And what is being born through this process is something far more powerful than simple independence. It is conscious autonomy. This is not the defensive kind of independence that says you do not need anyone because you are afraid of vulnerability. It is not ego-based detachment. It is not emotional isolation disguised as strength. Conscious autonomy is something deeper. It is the quiet, grounded realization that you know who you are. You understand what no longer aligns with your spirit, and you no longer require external permission to honor your truth. That is the transformation unfolding now. For many people, this may be the first time they fully experience personal sovereignty without guilt attached to it. The Sun in Gemini brings intellectual flexibility, perception, communication, awareness, and strategic thinking. Gemini energy adapts quickly. It sees multiple possibilities at once. It understands timing, language, patterns, and hidden openings others overlook. And when this mental agility harmonizes with Pluto's transformative power, something remarkable happens. Instead of reacting emotionally to every obstacle, you begin navigating life with clarity and precision. Instead of wasting energy forcing closed doors to open, you start recognizing alternate pathways that were invisible before. Instead of fighting battles rooted in ego, fear, or control, You begin conserving your energy for decisions that actually transform your future. This is the emergence of the conscious creator within you, the version of yourself that no longer lives entirely in reaction mode, the version that stops waiting for validation before making necessary changes, the version that establishes boundaries without apologizing for them, the version that can walk away from misaligned situations without needing everyone else to approve the decision first. And what makes this transformation so profound is that it is not merely intellectual. You are not simply thinking differently. You are becoming different in real time. The crisis itself is creating the awakening. The pressure point becomes the breakthrough. The emotional collapse becomes the doorway into a stronger identity. And because this transit operates not only psychologically but physically, many people will feel the effects directly inside the body today. Some may wake up feeling unusually heavy, sluggish, emotionally dense, or resistant to movement. It may feel as though gravity itself has increased. That sensation reflects the influence of Mars moving through Taurus, where physical reality feels thick, slow, and demanding. Yet underneath that heaviness, another sensation may simultaneously exist: a restless electricity beneath the skin, a feeling that something needs to shift immediately, even if you cannot fully explain what it is. This is Pluto's evolutionary pressure activating the nervous system. Some people will experience it through anger, others through anxiety. Many will feel both at once. The body may begin holding tension unconsciously: tightness in the jaw, stiffness in the shoulders, shallow breathing, nervous agitation, emotional fatigue. And this is important to understand, because your body is responding to transformation before your conscious mind completely catches up. The energy moving through you today is asking for awareness rather than panic. This is why grounding becomes essential. Breath becomes essential. The pressure trapped inside the body requires movement. When emotions intensify, when frustration rises, when anxiety builds, the most powerful thing you can do is stop and reconnect with the present moment physically. Deep breathing interrupts survival mode. Grounding yourself reminds the nervous system that transformation is not the same thing as danger. Evolution can feel uncomfortable without being destructive. The discomfort does not mean you are failing. It means something old is leaving your system. And this brings us to the most important realization of the day. The real power move during this transit is not aggressive control. It is strategic surrender. It is releasing the desperate grip you have maintained on identities, situations, relationships, or fears that no longer support your growth, while simultaneously reclaiming your personal power in a completely new way. Because the version of strength emerging now is not built upon force. It is built upon clarity, adaptability, self-trust, and the willingness to stop fighting for realities your soul has already outgrown. If you have been forcing yourself to remain inside a situation that is draining the life out of you simply because it feels familiar, today may become the moment where continuing to stay finally becomes more painful than the fear of change itself. The energy surrounding this transit is no longer allowing passive waiting. It is demanding conscious movement. For some people, that movement may arrive through a conversation they have rehearsed internally 1,000 times, but never dared to initiate. For others, it may arrive through a quiet realization that a chapter has already emotionally ended long before they were willing to admit it. If you have been staying inside a career that slowly erodes your spirit while pretending everything is manageable, the power of today may push you toward acknowledging what your soul has been trying to say for months. It may not require dramatic action immediately, but it may require honesty. It may require updating the resume you kept postponing, researching possibilities you convinced yourself were unrealistic, or finally admitting that surviving is not the same thing as living. The deeper transformation unfolding now is about becoming conscious enough to recognize where your life has fallen out of alignment, and brave enough to stop lying to yourself about it. And if your truth has been buried beneath years of emotional accommodation, today may confront you with the realization that silence is no longer sustainable. The pressure building within you is not asking for explosive reactions or destructive conflict. It is asking for clarity. It is asking you to communicate from a place deeper than anger. This is where the sun in Gemini becomes so important. Gemini energy does not blindly attack. It understands language, timing, awareness, perception, and strategy. It knows how to articulate truth with precision instead of chaos. So the breakthrough available to you today is not rooted in emotional destruction. It is rooted in conscious expression. It is the ability to stand firmly inside your identity and calmly declare what you need, what you deserve, and what you are no longer willing to tolerate. Many people have spent years overthinking themselves into paralysis. They examined every possible outcome until movement itself became impossible. They waited for certainty before taking action, not realizing certainty rarely arrives before the decision itself is made. But today's astrology is exposing how exhausting that cycle has become. The endless analyzing, doubting, hesitating, and second-guessing has trapped many people inside stagnant realities for far too long. And the energy now is asking you to choose, not because you possess every answer already, but because movement itself creates clarity. Even the smallest conscious decision can begin shifting the entire trajectory of your life. This is why today's power move is not forceful domination. It is strategic surrender paired with intelligent action. It is releasing the rigid approach that kept you emotionally trapped, while becoming flexible enough to see new possibilities emerging around you. Mars in Taurus keeps trying to charge directly through obstacles using sheer endurance, but the Sun in Gemini reveals a completely different path forward. The solution is not always to push harder. Sometimes the solution is perspective. Sometimes it is adaptation. Sometimes it is realizing there was another route available the entire time, but your fear kept you staring only at the locked door in front of you. The warrior trapped inside the emotional swamp of exhaustion, resentment, and stubborn attachment cannot survive by continuing the same battle indefinitely. But the strategist who rises above the emotional fog, who observes clearly, who thinks differently, who stops wasting energy on unwinnable conflicts, that version of you becomes almost impossible to stop. And what makes this transit even more significant is understanding that this transformation is not occurring only at the personal level. The collective itself is undergoing enormous pressure right now. One of the truths rarely discussed openly is that Mars-Pluto squares throughout history often coincide with periods of massive social tension, power struggles, structural collapse, revolutionary movements, financial instability, technological disruption, and exposure of systems that can no longer sustain themselves. The energy unfolding today exists both inside individual consciousness and within the larger collective field simultaneously. You may notice it in global conversations, political conflict, economic uncertainty, public unrest, or the growing sense that old structures no longer operate according to familiar rules. There is a feeling in the atmosphere that reality itself is shifting beneath people's feet. And while many may experience this collective transformation through fear, confusion, or resistance, there is another way to move through it consciously, because you are not separate from the transformation taking place around you. The same forces dismantling outdated external systems are also helping dismantle outdated internal identities. The same energy exposing corruption within the collective is exposing where you have abandoned your own power personally. And the same revolutionary force destabilizing rigid structures is simultaneously helping you reclaim your sovereignty from fear, conditioning, and emotional stagnation. This is why awareness matters so much right now. Conscious people are not immune to transformation, but they navigate it differently. They recognize that collapse and rebirth often occur simultaneously. They understand that endings are not always punishment. Sometimes they are preparation. And in the days following May 26th, something fascinating may begin happening within you. The emotional intensity of the transit will not disappear immediately, but your relationship to it may start changing rapidly. Situations that once felt emotionally impossible may suddenly become strangely clear. Decisions that previously overwhelmed you may now feel obvious. Relationships that drained your energy may either evolve naturally into healthier dynamics or begin fading away without dramatic confrontation. You may catch yourself responding differently to situations that once triggered deep insecurity. The fears that used to control your choices may still appear briefly, but their power over you will weaken because you will finally recognize them for what they are. Echoes of an identity you are already outgrowing. This is one of the quiet signs. Transformation is real. Your reactions begin changing before your external circumstances fully do, and the people around you may notice it before you even realize it yourself. Something in your energy shifts. The way you speak changes. The way you carry yourself changes. There is a steadiness that begins replacing emotional hesitation. Not arrogance, not performative confidence. Something much quieter and far more powerful. The kind of inner authority that develops when someone finally stops betraying themselves internally. Some people will feel deeply drawn toward this new energy within you because authenticity carries its own magnetic force. Others may distance themselves naturally because the version of you they were connected to no longer exists in the same way. And while that may feel painful temporarily, it is also part of the transition. Not everyone is meant to accompany you into every version of your future. Some relationships are connected to identities you are actively shedding now. The ones aligned with your next chapter will remain or arrive naturally, without force. The ones that are not aligned will slowly dissolve on their own. And as all of this unfolds, there is something important your deeper self already understands, even before your conscious mind fully catches up. At the soul level, you already know what needs to change. The deeper intelligence within you has been preparing for this turning point long before today arrived. That is why this energy feels so emotionally familiar despite its intensity. Somewhere beneath your fear, beneath your conditioning, beneath the survival patterns that kept you small, another part of you already recognizes this moment as necessary. You already know the version of yourself built entirely around fear, silence, emotional compromise, and self-suppression cannot continue indefinitely. And you also know that what waits beyond this transformation is worth the discomfort required to reach it. The universe does not create these moments to punish you. It creates them when your spirit is finally strong enough to evolve beyond what once confined it. So when emotions rise today, when pressure intensifies, when old realities begin shaking beneath your feet, remember that transformation rarely feels comfortable while it is happening. But discomfort does not mean you are failing. It means movement has finally begun. You are not collapsing. You are breaking through the psychological structures that kept your authentic self trapped for far too long. The unstoppable force and the immovable object are not opposing energies destroying each other. They are catalysts, creating transformation through friction. And inside that collision, a new version of you is emerging with greater clarity, deeper self-trust, and stronger conscious autonomy than ever before. 3 chapters are ending because they were never designed to last forever. One entirely new beginning is emerging because it has been waiting for you all along. This is the threshold. This is the shift. This is the moment where your future begins demanding more truth from you than your past ever did.